there. This is Novel Jutsu, and I'm your host, Raelyn. You might have noticed it's been a while since my last video. The shortest excuse I can give is 2020. What a year to try and debut my AuthorTube channel. Yikes. It took me a while to recover from some stuff that happened last year, but I'm finally here today with a new video. I started working on the videos for my series on world building that I promised, so that is in the works. But I also realized I never actually did the AuthorTube Newbie Tag. I figured I would do that in the meantime. The tag was created by Jenna, credit where credit is due, and with that, let's move on to the questions. I have completed 5 novels, but I'll go with my historical fantasy novel, The Wolf's Name, which is scheduled to be published at the end of 2022. And it goes like this. A Tarzan and Jane tale set in Victorian Western Canada with magic, murder, and monsters. I think I'd be one of those books that can't really decide what genre it belongs to in like the most cringy, haphazard way. Like, this book thinks it's a serious critique of power and class structures, but really it just wants to play with dragons. Pretty much everything I write has some sort of speculative element to it. I favor fantasy and sci-fi more than horror, but I'll write anything from soft sci-fi to urban fantasy to epic fantasy with my own invented cultures and conlangs. I love books with a strong thematic element that's expertly woven into the narrative. I'm not going to say I've successfully pulled this off as well as I'd like every time, or maybe even ever. Some of my books are deeply thematic and some a little less so, but it's always intentionally there at some level. Never say never, I suppose, but since I began writing novels, I've never had an idea that didn't involve some speculative element, so I'm unlikely to write anything that's purely contemporary or historical or whatever. The great thing about the speculative genres, I think especially with fantasy, is that they can easily borrow from or even outright follow the major tropes and plots from other genres. This means that if I ever get the urge to write a cozy mystery or a legal thriller, I don't necessarily have to feel like I'm stepping outside my genre or author brand to do so, as long as my stories contain some element of the fantastical. That said, there are certain kinds of tropes or scenes I'll probably never write. As much as I enjoy a little romance in novels, I'm definitely not an erotica writer. That isn't to say that under no circumstances would I ever include a sex scene of any kind, but I'd really truly have to feel like it was 100% necessary to include on the page, which is pretty unlikely given where my tastes are. Part of it is just to put myself out there and to be part of the writing community. I haven't always been good about that, but it's important to meet other writers and simply to be present in the community. This is a great place to share what I've learned, to learn from others, and to share in the writing process with my peers. This one's kinda hard to pinpoint. Like a lot of kids, I was pretty into telling stories when I was little, and I don't ever remember a time in my life when that desire to tell stories went away. There was a time as an early teen when I thought that desire would lead me to become an actor instead of a writer, but after being in a few plays, I discovered that A, I'm a terrible actor, and B, I preferred being a stagehand to the star. It was also around this time that I started getting into webcomics, and back then the webcomics community was much, much smaller than it is now. I can't trace my love of writing back to a single book or experience like some authors can, but I always knew I wanted to be involved in telling stories, and I feel like getting into webcomics was an important part of my experimenting with that. I fell in love with stories like Strings of Fate by Jen Wong, Saturnalia by Nina Matsumoto, Earth Song by Crystal Yates, and Inverloch by Sarah Ellerton. I really enjoyed these stories a lot, and it wasn't long before they kind of inspired me to make comics of my own. In my last video, I mentioned how I really struggled with writing because of a then undiagnosed health problem that was causing me pain and brain fog, and thus made it nearly impossible to write novels. But while writing paragraphs of prose was too difficult, I could sometimes still outline plots and come up with dialogue. Webcomics became a great way for me to still be able to tell stories even when my brain couldn't handle the task of writing an entire novel. But I eventually realized comics were more of a hobby for me, and my writing one true love was novels. As I mentioned in that other video, when I was an adult, I eventually learned that the culprit behind my migraines and brain fog was gluten. After removing that from my diet, my brain was finally able to delve into writing novels, and now here we are. For me, the main goal is traditional publishing. I like not having to be in charge of every little detail of getting a book into people's hands. That said, I could see myself becoming a hybrid author. As much as I just said that I don't want to be responsible for every aspect of publishing a novel all the time, that doesn't mean that sometimes I won't enjoy having that amount of control. I write both YA and adult novels, so maybe down the road I could have my YA novels traditionally published and self-publish my adult novels. We'll see. Like I mentioned in a previous question, I've been kind of bad about getting involved in the writing community, so I'm still figuring out exactly where my place is. One thing I hope I don't bring is more unnecessary rigidity to the writing community. I'm not here to tell you that my way is the best or the only way. I don't think this mentality is particularly helpful to new writers who may come to the table with a variety of backgrounds, needs, or disabilities. I can say that as a person with a disability, it was incredibly difficult when I was first trying to learn from established authors. They all seemed to be quoting from the same rule book, and they were just quoting rules that were counterintuitive to how I processed story. It took me a long time to realize that sometimes these rules were more a part of writer culture than they were about how to write a compelling story, and in some cases they may actually be damaging to some writers. My goal with this channel is not to tell any of you that you must write the way I do, but to collect different approaches to writing craft so that you can experiment with finding out what helps you. One of my biggest writing struggles is not taking enough breaks, to be honest. I mean both taking short breaks during a single writing session as well as taking days off from writing each week. It's really easy for me to burn out because I haven't made sure to look after my mental health by including time in my schedule that's purely for leisure. Writing is fun, but it's still work, and I've kind of learned the hard way that not giving my brain enough time to relax can end in disaster. My best writing skill is probably actually not so much a writing skill as it's editing. It's editing. I'm quite the overwriter, but I'm ruthless at the chopping block. I love taking sentences from my first draft that were passable but not really great, and making them leaner, making them more atmospheric, more revealing of character or world building, more thematic, just more. My biggest questions are ones I know are still hotly debated in the writing community and have no agreed upon answer yet. So, on to the next question. I'm currently brainstorming for a new novel, so I definitely won't be looking for new betas for that project for a while, but I currently don't have a CP, so there's that. Mostly I'd love to get to know other writers and make writer friends, so if you want to be my friend, hit me up. Honestly, I'm just excited to make those new AuthorTube friends. So don't be shy. We can't both be shy. That's it for this video. I hope you got to know me a little bit. Definitely leave a comment or look for me on Twitter if you want to be one of my writer friends. And I will see you in the next video.